Welcome to Kümneger Talks. I'm your host, Selam Abebe. Welcome back to part 3 of concluding our conversation on masculinity, subjectivity, and well-being from the perspective of Habesha men. Let's jump right in.
So from what I'm hearing is some of the things that you're seeing as being part of the root cause for some of these issues around depression is related to a lot of the conversations we've been having today. It seems. And not necessarily having an outlet or a platform to have these conversations, that connectivity piece that you mentioned, Lealem. Would that make sense?
Yeah, I would say so, yeah.
Guy, what do you think?
Yeah, 100%. It's funny because talking about it, it's actually literally for me anyway. It's what I've been saying, that, like, for example, going back to the whole, the way, like, how honest I am and the way that the way I used to talk to people. Like, imagine how I talk to myself in my head. If that's how I'm talking to people, like, I'm thinking that's normal, right? So, like, I didn't realize there was a TED Talks that I was listening to that was saying how this guy, he's a psychologist, and he was talking about he was giving an example, and he said, hey, like, if you were to go out on a date with someone and they just started talking really badly about you, would you stay on that date or would you go away? I don't know if you know the TED Talk, but yeah, and obviously everyone would say they would leave. Like, why would they? Even if it's a friend, like, if they're just all the time, they're just kind of speaking down to you or whatever the case may be, you wouldn't stay friends with that person. Why would you? But I feel like a lot of times I catch myself talking to myself like that, like, and I think a lot of it is, I don't know, I have a lot of respect for what my dad did as a single parent, and there's a lot of ambition that I have. So whenever I fall short, the way I talk to myself is not healthy. Like, if I was talking to another person like that, that would not be okay. And I think for me, that's where the depression kind of comes in, because it's just like, man, like, you're so lazy. Like, come on, let's go get after it. But really, like, there's a few things, like, I have good friends around me to kind of say, like, no, you've done this, you've, like, kind of pointing out the achievements. But self-love is not something that's talked about in the Habesha community. I've never seen that. That for me is a big one. I had another one, but I can't think of anything. In the meantime, if someone else wants to come in.
No, it makes sense about the self-love piece, because culturally what I see a lot of is sort of, you do for others. You're always extending yourself out, right? And that's also very much further inculcated in religiously, whatever religion you practice in the community. And so it's very much ingrained that you do, and you don't always sort of replenish back, or the idea is that by doing, you're replenishing yourself back. But I think it goes back to what you're talking about, Sagai, which is the importance of, the key that's missing within that is, how do I understand myself? What do I want? How do I take care of myself? How do I fulfill my needs without making it seem that I'm being selfish, right? Because that's the thing in the community that's very much sort of frowned upon, is that if you're doing for yourself quite a bit, then it's sort of like this person is a little bit selfish. Yeah. They don't extend themselves out. So I've seen that a little bit as well, although it can be rationalized as actually being a good thing. So it's what you're saying. It's that middle ground of then how does the sort of wearer of that culture experience that within themselves is a part that's actually not discussed. I agree. What do others think?
Yeah, I wanted to just bounce off what you just said, Mary, about like the spiritual aspect, because that's like, I very much identify with that, where like as a Ethiopian Protestant Pentecostal Christian, like I had a very huge part of my experience be this sort of involvement and service within my faith community. And like, I didn't have a good sense of balance. I didn't have a good sense of like, what does it mean to like take care of myself as I'm pouring out or as I'm serving. And I think like in the worst possible ways, I learned like what it meant to run out. I learned what it meant to be depleted, to burn out. And I think, yeah, like that language and like those expectations are so ingrained and so deep that like even after years and years of like involvement in service, like I felt so guilty backing out of it. I felt so guilty, like slowly removing myself from it because those expectations felt so like clear to me in my head that like I was still supposed to be doing this because I had done it for so long and helped lay the foundation as far as like service or like involvement, that if I was to stop, that was a selfish act. That if I was to stop it, that was like really bad. And it took a lot of like self-reflection and yeah, a lot of back and forth, a lot of like, you know, it took a long time. It took a very long time to learn like what's a healthy boundary. And I think sometimes it's like it's put on you by your environment from, you know, that messaging, and you absorb it. But then other times like that messaging is so strong that like you reinforce it to yourself like 100-fold. That once you do come out of it, like people generally are compassionate and understanding. They're like, oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. Like you probably weren't going to do this thing forever. But I'm like, wait, what? Like I could have done that like years ago when I was like suffering in silence. Like I could have just slowly had set boundaries. And so for me, that was like one of those things where I'm like, how did I not know that? Or like, why did it take me so long to like set those healthy boundaries as far as like lack of self-care, you know, and like even learning what that is. And I think again, to connect it with what was spoken about before, I think we don't in our community talk about self-care enough. We don't talk about mental health as being like a distinct part of larger health.
Mhm.
It's like it's really overly focused, and it's tied only to like spiritual things. And so if you struggle mentally, it means that there's like a very clear spiritual reason why, and you can rectify that spiritually and not with any, you know, science, and not with any health, not with any awareness, you know. So yeah.
I agree. I think, you know, in terms of what you were talking about, the whole, you know, how do I institute boundaries and can I institute boundaries becomes such a foreign thought to you because you're not seeing it, right? And then you almost kind of feel guilty that you want to institute that in. And you're like, me wanting this, does this still make me part of the community? And what do I stand to lose if I want to have those boundaries instituted in, right?
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, perhaps there's a lot of people who also feel that way and who are having that going around in a circle in their heads this way. And so therefore just keep doing more and more and more and more. And it just ends up in a place that you're talking about, depression, mental health, and other kinds of resentments. But, you know, there's also very interesting ways in which I think we could have these conversations, is to sort of see the ways in which people are doing or instituting these boundaries in a way that we're not seeing or even understanding or even reconceptualizing in some sense. Maybe not everybody going to the same thing. Like there's some families who show up to everything, then there's those that show up to certain ones. And when they show up, they're still accepted. Maybe that's their way of instituting boundary. And we don't know that, right? Because we're not having these conversations. Because there's a fear of judgment. There's a fear of, what do you mean you don't want to be around your community? So you just feel like you're going to lose something. So I'm wondering if those conversations would also be really helpful to sort of see in what ways are people doing boundaries and what do they look like and how do we recognize that and respect it as such. But then also at the same time, how do we collectively institute those pieces in there so that those that do want to come to everything can, because some people really thrive in those kinds of environments, but that might not be the case for everybody. So how do we create that balance? I think that makes sense. What do others think?
I'll play a little bit of like devil's advocate here, but what about the opposite, where, because I've seen people, they're like in their proverbial cocoon, they don't branch out, they don't put themselves in position where they are asked or expected to do something, and it just kind of like it's maybe me reading into it, but like I feel like they limit themselves and they don't know their own potential, like what they're capable of. There is a point, obviously, like it will be too much and you'll reach breaking point, etc. But it's kind of like, I don't know, like going to the gym or what, like you have to push yourself to the limits to see like what you can do as well. Like, obviously you don't want it to be to the detriment of your mental health or anything like that. But like, is there, I don't know, is it healthy to like be accepting of a certain amount of mental health instability in order to like fulfill your potential? That makes sense. I don't know.
I think what, for myself, what I'm trying to say is there's this conditional love that's offered by our parents. Like they're not doing it on purpose, but I think at the beginning, as long as the right foundation is set, and then after that, like there's a certain time I feel like you're supposed to let the kid kind of decide for, or like you're supposed to do a lot, like a lot of hands-on stuff in the long run actually stunts the growth more than allows the kid to actually grow. I feel like you at a young age, you're kind of similar to my oldest brother, and I don't even know you, but I feel like because you had a certain understanding and you saw the work ethic that your parents had, and you saw that you're working 2 jobs, like you said, and you kind of already knew that you're gonna, you know, support family back home just because you saw it happening already. I feel like for you, it might be a different, and I'm sorry for assuming, but it might be a different outlook, where for someone who doesn't necessarily see that at the beginning, as long as you set the right foundation and you're leading as an example. I've seen a lot of situations where, and I'm grateful enough and privileged enough to see the hard work that my dad did, that I know hard work is important, but I can see in certain households, the parents aren't really, like they're working hard, but they're not working hard at home. At home, they're kind of just relaxing or whatever the case may be. So they don't necessarily see the work ethic that they're actually putting in because they don't see them at work. They see them at home. And at home, they may be relaxing or whatever the case may be. Especially the boys. I think a lot of the reasons for why the boys may not have a lot of respect for the fathers is because they don't see the kind of work that the fathers are doing. They're just seeing them at home. And at home, they're just relaxing because they just had a long day. Right. So I think what you're saying is true if there's no foundational work that's been done by the parents. But I think if they're living as an example to the kid, and they're like not only living as an example, but also kind of having the real conversations, like, hey, this is why, you know, X, Y, Z, whatever the case may be, like fully explaining rather than saying, no, this is just the way that it is. And also picking the battles too. I feel like I remembered my point, and it actually goes back to the whole hair thing. Like my dad was super unorthodox. I was actually the first Christian in my household. Like my dad didn't go to church, my brothers didn't go to church. Like in Ethiopia, we were forced to, but it was more because of the culture more than because they were in love with God. And he was very like hands off. You know what I mean? Why did I say that? The hair thing. He, like when it came to, I was like, hey, can I get shurubat? Like, can I get braids? Like when I was in elementary school, he's like, yeah, sure. Like, and then he showed me in history, he's like, you know, if you had cornrows in this particular village, it was like you're a warrior. And he's like, he was kind of like building it up. He was, and then I was just like, nah, I'm good. I'll just stick with my Afro fade. Like I didn't really care. But it's because he did the foundational work and the way, like there was barely a time I would see him where he's not in a suit. Like he was a living example for me where I did definitely do a lot of things, but I did keep coming back because I had a good anchor. So I think if that anchor is there and you see that work ethic, generally speaking, I can't say for everyone, but generally speaking, it's you're not gonna just sit in laziness. A lot of times I feel like if anything, it becomes more like, I don't, maybe that's just my personal experience, but that's what I had to say in response to that.
Yeah, I can give a concrete example. Like, for example, like I don't know, let's say high school or whatever. I come home, all report cards come out or something, and it's like I got 90s, and then it's not like, oh, good job, you got 90s. It was like, why'd you not get 95? Did anyone else get 95? Like,
there you go.
It was like, but then I don't know. At the time, yeah, I didn't like everyone at school was like, whoa, you got a 90. Like And then I go home and it's like, yeah, you gotta like, and I think it was on purpose. Like, it wasn't that she wasn't happy. Like,
It's just to build you up, to push you.
Yeah, exactly. That was the
Yeah.
thing. Now, that's how I see it now. So, and then, but obviously at the time, like I kind of felt bad, like, and like, I don't know, back then there was no like, there's no mental health or whatever. Like, so like looking at it now, I would be like, oh yeah, like I felt bad. So like she put me in a depressive state or something. But then what was the result of that? Did that like, okay, make me try harder to get the 95 next time? Or did that like make me like, I don't know, like worse off or something? And then like personally, I would say, and I think there's different ends of that to fall on. Personally, I felt like it helped me push myself. Like it was a reason for me to push myself to do better. But
Can I ask you a question?
yeah.
What if you had 50s and that's what your mom said?
Then it would be confirming. You're right. Yeah, it would confirm what.
That's what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Like I feel like because you're at a certain point, like that's why I said you're like my oldest brother, because he's a genius. But like again, I was fortunate enough to not be in that. But for someone who's not doing well already, you don't encourage them by saying, what did other people do? What was the average? No, that if anything, that would discourage you and make you want to quit more than anything. Where if they were like, okay, did you try, like my dad's approach was more like, is this the best that you can do? Like that was the kind of approach that he did. And then I would just kind of go away and I'd be like, you know what? I think I could do better. I think I could apply myself better. Where I think if he was like you got what? Like, you know what I mean? C's, whatever, right? I probably would have been like, wow, I'm actually stupid. Like, I can't believe I did that. Like, why am I even trying that? What's the point? I think I would have given up. That's the point that I'm trying to make.
That's possible.
Yeah, just to piggyback off that, I think there's generally in Habesha culture, like somewhat more of a focus on accomplishments than you, like as a person. So I think that would be a healthy shift if we start to focus more on, obviously they do instill morals and values and that is prioritized, but if it's more of, like raising good people than raising successful people, which success I think should have a different like metric to gauge that. It shouldn't be, average at school or this and that, because not everyone learns the same way. Not everyone has the same, like not everyone wants to be a doctor and lawyer, but most Habesha parents, that would be the ideal situation, right? You end up either a medical doctor or a lawyer. So yeah, I think that it could be negative to kids' mental health is having that constant obligation to reach certain accomplishments, and then when you fall short of that, it's like you as a person are falling short of being a great person, if you don't meet those criteria. And I forgot what else I was gonna say, but yeah, that's the gist of it, I think.
100%. Like, and I feel really passionate about this, to be honest. Like, even from the group, I was really excited because growing up, like elementary school, I failed ESL 3 times. Like average was like 60s, like horrible student, horrible. And then like I ended up taking a victory lap. I ended up increasing my GPA from like, I was in the 60s to high 80s, whatever that GPA would have been. I got accepted into university, dropped out of university because I was just working and family stuff. And then my idea of success was still like, the whole point of school is so that you can get a good job and you could provide for your family, right? And this isn't to boast or anything, but just because this is a podcast and whoever's listening to this might benefit from this. But I have 3 properties. I have tenants. I have a small business that I run. I have a job that I do. And all of these accomplishments, it's not, I thought this was a successful, like, oh, like I've done it, I've achieved it. But it's not. There's so many other ways of looking at success, and it's not the way that the Habesha community looks at it. It's not like, yes, it's education is great. I'm not trying to say say don't get an education, but also I'm not trying to say don't get a good job. I'm not trying to say don't make money, but it's not the end all be all. These are just things that you acquire along the way. I think going like piggybacking off what you're saying is more. I think what's more important is having the right mindset, having the right mental. I don't know. Like I feel like if I'm not working on myself now and fixing this, then I'm just gonna repeat the same thing for the next generation and just send the same message, which is really crippling, to be honest. It's the wrong message.
Yeah, just to add to that. Oh, sorry. Something or oh no.
No, go ahead.
I thought I heard a sound, but yeah. Ironically, I think by putting more of a focus on the child, it actually helps them for success better, because let's say you just focused on like the values and, you know, being a good person, being driven, not quitting, you know, finding what's best for you and all these things, they'll ultimately land on success, like not even monetary wise, but like in terms of happiness, finding, doing what they love, having friends, all these things, they'll land on that if, you know, the internal stuff is instilled first. So I think that would be, like he said, like a healthy shift of focus, as opposed to the traditional accomplishments of, you know, certain averages, certain degrees, certain prestigious schools, acceptances and stuff. And it'd also be good for like the mental health of the kid. And I think that manifests in many ways, you know, there's a lot of benefits from that. So.
I was just gonna bounce off what you just said, Mickey, because I feel like as another Satan's advocate point, I feel like it's like I think because like the older generation, the older Habesha generation, their idea of success was so constrained by like survival and economic like stability, it almost like defaulted to looking like financial success and career success, and like lawyer, engineer, doctor are not coincidentally the highest paying jobs, you know, like they felt like that was the way to survive. But I think, again, going back to that piece where like maybe we are evolving, maybe as a community we are, you know, pushing the needle a bit, like there is this understanding that depending on what country you live in, you don't have to be a lawyer, doctor, engineer to have a stable life, you know? And I think like the more that we can kind of have that conversation and like get out of that like survival mentality and into like, how do we thrive now? Because you could be a lawyer, doctor and be a horrible person. You could be an engineer and I don't know, like beat your wife, like you could be abusive, you know? So it's like having that conversation and like holding it as valuable as like the monetary success, I feel like is something that we're only able to have because we're in a society that allows for like more survival without so much success. You know what I mean? Like we can survive at like minimum wage jobs, like, oh, maybe not minimum wage, that's rough. That's honestly paycheck to paycheck, but like there is a middle class, you know what I mean? And like that middle class now I feel like is easier to get to. So I can't help but feel like we can have these conversations and we can be kind of like a incrementally better parent if we want to have kids, because we've reached a place where like success can look different and still be stable. You know what I mean? So I think that's a huge piece of it too.
Selam.
Yeah.
So I wanted to sort of bring this up because you mentioned this earlier about trying to sort of straddling and figuring out what it means to be a Habesha Western, if you will, type of a thing, right?
Yeah.
Do you think this is part of that? Sort of how to juggling this piece is sort of part of that, getting out of that expectation around survival to one where you're saying, you know, and Mikias, you've said it too, being here, there's so many opportunities, right? So many opportunities that you can tap into, so many different ways in which you can build stability and success, as Sagai has done, right?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, do you think that this might be part of that tension that perhaps that some people are experiencing as well? You know, that getting out of that traditional expectation, lawyer, doctor, whatever, engineer, to hey, you know, I want to own properties, and this is, there's ways in which I can do that, and here's how I'm going to do it, and I'm going to be an artist, and there's different ways in which I can do this, and here's how I'm going to be successful in doing that, and so on and so forth, outside of that quote unquote traditional path in which parents understand to be success and stability.
Yeah, you're asking if sort of the tension between like the Habesha, like identity and the Western identity like plays a part in that. Yeah, I think it does for sure. Because I think, like just looking at like my cousin who like is the most recent like person I know who came to Canada. His mentality was so much like, so he drove like heavy duty trucks and like did like import export stuff, very dangerous roads, traveling, doing really rough work. And when he came to Canada, his instinct wasn't, oh, okay, let me like go to adult high school, let me get that degree and let me find work. It was instinctively like, okay, I need to get like the big truck license so that I can continue that same mode of like success here. And it like, I don't know if necessarily that works best. And like trying to communicate that like, oh, education is kind of important in this society. Like we're a heavily education like centric society. Like the better the education, like the more you kind of lay a foundation for options. Trying to kind of not prove or like convince, but kind of convince that to him was like, to my surprise, like difficult. And all I thought I had to say was be like, hey, I took the traditional engineer route, and I'm okay, and that should be enough. And like look at other people like find work. But he was so sure that like no, he knew kind of like what was beyond his like options as far as like short term, like what is the fastest way to get there. And I think there is that survival mentality that like that tension is there when you come. If I can use him as an example of like thinking about like what does survival mean in this society, and like what does success look like in this society. And sometimes you have to be willing to like be to think differently and to like reinvent yourself. And that's really hard when you come from a place of survival. That's really hard when you're like just scraping, so I think that's a piece of it too, where if there's enough time to have like the stability, the housing, the resources where like you're comfortable, you have like the luxury of reinventing yourself. You have the luxury of like going back to school at 45, but when you're a bit older, and like he's a little bit older in his age, like he's maybe in his 30s, those options don't seem really possible to you. And you just think, well, I just got to focus on what was successful for me back home and like make that work here, so yeah.
Would you say we're not a very like idealistic, like we're not like we're very realist, and it's like we understand the limitation, like I'm thinking from his perspective, like he understands the limitations he came here with, age, language, et cetera, and then there are things that need to be, he might have family back home that he needs to immediately, whatever. So like he's just a realist. Like
absolutely, I think that's a huge part of it. You're totally right. Yeah.
I guess the part that I don't like is sometimes that realism changes into pessimism really fast. And that's the part that I have a problem with the Habesha community. Because it's like, I don't know, there's certain things that you can be optimistic about, and there's certain things that are like, no one in this group is ever going to be in the NBA. Like, you know what I mean? There's going to be things that you can be realistic about, period. Like, that's a fact. But then there's certain things that you can kind of, hope, you can dream, you can have, like, that's the whole reason our parents moved here, so that we can have the opportunities they didn't. And I think sometimes they focus so much on giving us the opportunities that we didn't have, that they didn't have, that they kind of impose their fears onto us. And that's what I mean when I'm saying the pessimism part. It's just like you can't look at life from a point of fear. If you do, then like you're not really living.
How do we change that? What's the conversation we need to have with parents? Or is there particular kinds of points in growing up, or when you're being parented?
Honestly, I think we
should pay attention to. I'm not sure how to form the question other than to say, so how do we interrupt it, I guess?
Yeah, I think personally for me, I've kind of been thinking about it a bit, but like I said, I don't want to repeat the same thing with when I do decide to have a family. And I think the most important thing is our parents need to have first of all, our parents are amazing. The things that they've done, the things that they've seen, the things that they've experienced. I'm not dismissing that. I very much so respect my elders. But at the same time, I think it's important to address why certain things are being done. I feel like sometimes we just accept things as they are rather than asking why. And there's nothing wrong with asking why. And really getting to the bottom of what the motivation is, why we do why are we saying that you can't grow your hair? Like why? Like, and beyond that answer, why? And I feel like growing up, asking, like, again, I was fortunate enough that my dad didn't, he actually encouraged questions, but I've noticed a lot of Habesha households, they don't like questions, right? Especially if you're younger, it's just, hey, because you're under my roof and that's what it is, right? I've seen that a lot, and I didn't even realize how amazing the parenting that I had in that sense was until much later. But yeah, no, I was very, like, I was encouraged to ask questions and to do things outside of the box. And if you look at every single, like, successful person, whether that's money, whether that's happiness, whatever the case may be, it's outside of the box. It's not following the rules. It's asking questions. It's getting to the reason as to why you do certain things. And there's nothing wrong with being different. I feel like Habeshas are scared of that, like, people being different. There's nothing wrong. Like, it's okay if you're different, and you talk different, you move. Like, I have a dog. Sometimes to this day, like, I have Habeshas that go like, what? You have it? What? Like, so I don't know. It's okay to be different. And just asking questions it should be encouraged in our culture. I think that would change a lot.
I was just gonna say, like, I think too, maybe part of, like, what our community needs is, like, yeah, like an understanding of, like, where these ingrained things come from, like that mentality of, you were just touching on it, Zekai, about you were like, I lost my thought. Yeah, like sticking out, right? Like, if I think of, like, Habesha society, it is very much a homogenous society. Like, it's homogenous in lots of ways. It's very, very, like, static. And when you stick out, you get knocked down. And so, like, that is, like, intrinsically what they carry. And sometimes maybe they don't have the language. Like, my parents, if I was to ask them, like, some things, if I were to ask them why, like, when it came to the hair, they didn't have an intrinsic, like, answer for why, because that wasn't something that they had conceptualized yet. You know what I mean? Like, they weren't there yet. So I think maybe part of that, like, what has to happen to like, address these things in our community is an opportunity for the older generation to process and to make those connections and say, maybe I was this way because these things were my way of survival. And I think without, like, the freedom, like, to know, for them to feel like they can comfortably and safely say those things and have that conversation, then that, like, we just become more stratified in terms of, like, what they think in the older generation and how we move. And I think, yeah, I don't know how, but I just feel like that would help. Just don't know how we would make that happen. But I think
like
we need therapy. I wish adults need therapy. That's what we need.
Every Habesha needs therapy. 100%.
Facts.
I feel like we're going in the right direction. I mean, with this podcast and everything, this really definitely, I mean, maybe not just help us, but also help other people, like you guys mentioned. But no, I really appreciate, being here and, bouncing a lot of bouncing going on. But I gotta run. But I'm so happy that I took part in this, and I think it does wonders, even for me personally. I think, so I think podcasts like this, talking about it, just speaking up with your circle of friends and just, bringing awareness to it is the step in the right direction.
I think I'll just jump in
Thank
here.
you.
Before we leave, I think the biggest way that we can change that is just showing and displaying and then holding up on a pedestal these alternative forms of, like, success, so that that generation or the forthcoming generation, etc., has a conception, like conceptualizes, oh, success also looks like this. So let's say, I don't know, like you can be The Weeknd, you can be Ethiopian, a singer, and like be a millionaire. You can be whatever, but like our institutions of recognition don't know what they are. For example, I know one, like in Toronto, there's a thing called the Bakila Awards.
Yep.
And I know they, for example, have like, I've been to a few of them where they have like a category for like arts or something.
Yeah.
And they recognize people through that, or humanitarian work, or
Yeah.
so essentially it's just, I think that's the way to do it, is just like show living, speaking, talking examples of people that have achieved success, and then like actually like treat them like they've accomplished something, hold them in a high regard, etc. And then slowly but surely will our idea of success will change with that, as long as we're exposed to it.
For sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say, actually, that was the exact same point I was gonna say. I think obviously, if let's say you go down a certain career path and the Habesha community isn't, let's say, too fond of it because it doesn't conform to the traditional pathways, once you're successful in it, obviously then there won't be as much of a problem. So I think the more the more representation there is of success in those different avenues, there's more of an acceptance that grows over time, like he said. And I think mentoring and being like a positive role model for the youth about all the things we spoke about being like open about mental health, open about, I don't know, choosing different career paths, open about whatever the case may be. Being an active role model goes a long way, because I've seen like to what degree kids look up to their elders. Like my dad had 2 kids recently, like my sister is 7, my brother is 4, and like obviously we're family, so it's on a different level, but they really look at me as like a role model. And then even at church, you know, when I go back, I see the younger kids and they really look up to our generation. So I think being an intentional positive role model and mentor for the youth can go a long way in shifting the culture for the community.
I think, you know, one of sort of the drawbacks that we've had is anyone that dares to, and I'll use your language, like be different in the community, because of sort of sticking out, as Lealem said, and being knocked back down to some extent. What they tend to do is they leave the community altogether, so you don't see them anymore. You don't see them. It's like they disappear almost, and they become this like mythical figure of someone that was once seen, but then you don't know them, but everybody knows about them. It's like, yeah, and then they disappeared. We don't know where they are. I'm sure you probably all come across stories like that. I know I have, right? And so it's like we don't want to lose that either, because Mikias, that's exactly what you're talking about, right? Having these examples, these quote unquote different but necessary and important examples, right, that demonstrate stability and success in a different way than the traditional expected ways. I think is a really important in bridging sort of that gap and allowing people to know that they have multiple opportunities to be whatever they want to be. But if we're losing those people because the community is not open to that kind of a difference, let's say, then how do we sort of breed that, right? And I think I agree with everything that you all are saying, which is I think having these kinds of conversations like the one that we're having now is really super important. But then when we do know that these people exist, for instance, right? Like Johannes, you mentioned the Bakila Awards. I've been to them as well, several times pre-COVID. It would make sense to nominate them for these kinds of things so that they are seen and so they are heard, because it's a huge event, it's a huge dinner. And then it's got quite the social media presence and publicity as well, right? And there's also opportunities for scholarships for young people for school, right? And so lots of people go, families go, they take their children, they want them to be exposed to what excellence looks like in its multiplicity of ways, right? So because of that, I think it's important to bring them in and nominate them for these kinds of things, Johannes, is sort of the thought that I had in my mind, and figure out different kinds of ways in which we keep them in the community so that they don't disappear and so we don't have access to them, so that people don't grow up thinking that we don't have those opportunities, in these kinds of ways. I don't know what you think about that, but
well, yeah, it feeds back into like, it even helps like I know, like I don't know him personally, but like I know they nominated The Weeknd. I think they gave him an
they
award.
did. Yeah, they
And
did.
then
Yeah.
like the next year or something, he donated to one of the causes that one of the profs at U of T was trying to start, like a good
Yeah.
so
The
like
Ethiopics program at U of T.
exactly. So like you like, I don't know what comes first, but I think like in this example that I've seen, I think it's the community recognizing that person that has the potential of like distancing themselves from the community, then they feel a sense of attachment or obligation, and then they want to feed back and support or do something for the community. So that's why I think that's the easiest way, I guess.
No, I think it's an excellent suggestion. And for sure, now we'll just put that plug in again, look it up, and someone who's done that, like for example, it's that guy, you might want to nominate them and have them be honored and come in and have that conversation with young people. Because it is a kind of a relationship that they form with the awards committee in that sense, and they tend to do quite a bit of community work after in the form of talks and so on and so forth. So those are opportunities there.
I feel like just to add to what you guys are talking about, one thing as like both being a person who's left the community and also being the person who has seen people leave and just trying to reintegrate back, I think one thing that I hope people are mindful of, mostly like older adults, is just it's almost like the guilt that they put back on you of like, why did you disappear? We need you to do this. We need you to do this. You need to be an example. And you're like, I'm just showing up for Christmas. Like, I'm just trying to say Happy New Year and like reconnect with the message. So I feel like it would be nice to like sort of not have that guilt over your head all the time and just be welcomed for being you and being there and deciding to show up.
I think it goes back to what Guy was saying. We're just like an honest company. Like it's just blunt. It's like there's no, you know what I mean? It's like let's not create a welcoming environment or whatever. It's just true. Like you've been gone for a year. Like that's what I'm gonna talk about.
That classic yetafa, like people love saying yetafa. So like the person who disappeared. And I think there is like, I've seen people in like for example, the Ethiopian like Pentecostal community who are older, but they've like learned how to like communicate with young people in that way and how to like just be really positive and encouraging. And so when you do see that person you've been seeing in a while, she'll be like, it's so great to see you. Like no one feels guilty coming to a place they haven't in a long time and someone says it's great to see you. You're gonna be like, you know what, I kind of miss them. But those type of people are unicorns in our community, unfortunately. That's how like people who just say like, hey, it's great to see you. Usually the default is like, where are you? Like, what's going on? Like, talk to my son. He's headed around the wrong path. Why aren't you here? And I don't think they know, they can't make that connection because we've never felt safe enough to tell them that way, that like when they do that, they're really pushing us away. You know what I mean? Like that's effectively what's happening. But yeah.
So I think maybe if I may dare to say final question, what would you do differently when you become parents, if that's something you want to do?
Parents.
Therapy.
100%.
Amen.
The whole family's going to therapy, or
no, myself. I can't speak. Yeah. Well, of course, I would want. I don't know about the whole family. I'm hoping by the time I do bring human beings into this world, like I'm good, and my partner is gonna be good, and by good I mean we're gonna be in a healthy headspace where we can have like open dialogue. Like that's not to say like, I'm a Christian first, so that's not to say that I'm not gonna lay the foundations, but it's to say I'd rather have a proper conversation and really analyze and get to the bottom of things. And I feel like emotional intelligence is very important. Therapy is number one, 100%. I would recommend every Habesha that has a parent that, even if their parent was born here, like just because of the move and the experiences that our parents would have had and us, if we ended up growing there and coming back, like it is a huge difference. Therapy is 100%, number one, 100%. And Christian therapy. for the record, just to put it out there.
Noted. Johannes, what do you think?
I'll go back. Like I said, like at the beginning of the first question I answered, like I think stories as a kid like play a big role in like formulate like who you think you are and all that kind of stuff. And then the biggest, I guess, mental health crisis or thing that I would want to prevent my future kids from kind of like despair, like having like them thinking that there's nothing, that's it, they have no choice, they're done, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. So those two things, keeping those two things in mind, my strategy, I believe, would be to kind of not indoctrinate, but like just expose them to stories of different Ethiopians and people in general that have alternative forms of success other than the traditional norms that we have, and show them that it didn't all happen in this like linear path that we expected. Like, okay, you're 18, you're in grade 12, then you're gonna get your first degree, then you're gonna like 24, 26, this is gonna like not every time happens in that way. There's like this guy that went down here, he was broke, he was at the bottom of the street, whatever, pursuit of happiness, except like those stories essentially. So such that, and then at a young age, such that in their mind, there will always be a light at the end of the tunnel. They'll never reach the stage where it's like, that's it, it's done, I have no future. It's like, well, this guy thought he had no, but this happened. And then as long as those stories are in their head, I feel that would get them through a lot of potential future tribulation and stuff like that.
Thank you. Like, yes?
Yeah, for me, it would just, I forget who said it, open discussions. But yeah, I would just want them to always feel comfortable coming to me with anything. So I think that would help with every aspect, with the mental health, with openness to different paths in life. If that thing is fundamentally instilled in them, that they can always come to me and their mom for whatever it is that they need, or with any like questions they may have, that like we're fully open, I think that goes a long way, and that can help like offset any traditional view on anything, you know, if that openness and that comfort is instilled in them.
Yeah, I'll jump in there too. Yeah, just because that's exactly kind of where I was going with it too, Mikias. Nurturing that curiosity to ask why, like some guy was saying earlier, and really answering that why and looking at intentions for any real life choice or life decision that we'd walk through as a family, I think would really go a long way in kind of opening up options and possibilities and allaying, I guess, fears that a kid would have. But yeah, I mean, I think ideally any parent will want to be open to some degree with their kid, right? Where it's appropriate, just have like one-on-one discussions, because that is your genetic extension of yourself, right? So where should the kind of the hiding be, right? Like where should the I guess the closedness be, you know?
I was just gonna say, like, resonated a lot with what Mickey said. I've said about like the openness. For me, I think it's because there's a lot that I feel I've had to hide from my own parents. And I think like part of it is like for sure natural and would have happened regardless of what kind of parents they were. But there are some parts that wouldn't have been the case if maybe I just had a better sense that like I didn't have to meet an expectation of them, you know, like, and I think, I don't know what that looks like if I, you know, when I become a parent, God willing, but I know it has to do with like making it okay for the child to not have met whatever expectation they think I have of them, like making them know that it's okay that things turned out a little differently than maybe I've laid out for you, because I think that like openness, yeah, just like lets you be free, lets you have that open conversation and that transparency. yeah, and I at the same time too, I know like I feel like a lot of younger like our generation kids, like our generation wants to have kids and be like best friends with their kids, and I know that there's gonna be that like swing to the other side where like you're just so best friends that they don't have a respect. But I don't know. I think I'm gonna try that one out first because the experience I've had is the opposite. So, you know, let's just flip the needle to the other side. Just see what happens. You know, experiment, and then work it out. The kid can work it out in therapy after. You know, you're gonna need therapy regardless of what I do. So.
It's like 30 years later, they're having the same conversation.
They're like, I wish
I want to be my best friend.
Alan was my best friend, but like I had no respect for my father. Like, can you imagine? Oh man. Yeah.
I want that conversation.
Yeah.
Sure.
I just want to say thank you to both Selam and Mary. I really appreciate this, just giving us the ability to come together and talk. Also, just for other folks who are interested in this perspective, I think what you guys are doing is amazing, and keep it up. That's amazing. Thank you for this opportunity.
It came from the ground up, really. That's the truth. It's not us. It's from the ground up. You're welcome.
And humble. Look at you.
No, it's true. It's true. I take no credit. And also, I ground up because Lealem, you could tell them, right? Like that, Johannes as well. That's one of the questions I asked at the end, which was, you know, how do you want this to be represented at a community level? I don't want to make that decision. I know from an academic sense what it's going to look like, but it has to come from you. Like, in what ways can we do this in such a way that it has access and meaning to people? So you tell me what you want, and then we'll work on it. So that was really the question.
You still a lot of your time and stuff that you put in, and like conducting those interviews. I remember, like, I think it was like over an hour with Mary last year. So like, the gratitude is deserved.
Absolutely.
100%.
It's hard. Davershan means like reject.
Literally, yeah.
Yeah,
that could be
Wrong conditioning.
That could be its own
So
podcast.
it's got me sweating. I'm telling you, like, God, it's
Next
such a-
episode. On the next episode.
Literally.
How to deprogram
I
yourself.
do not know how to take a compliment. Yeah.
You don't.
I'm just so awkward. I'm like, no,
So
no.
awkward.
It's not me, it's God. It's not me. No.
I didn't realize it was a Habesha thing. I thought it was just me. I thought I had a.
Oh, man.
Are you?
Are you kidding?
I didn't realize it was a Habesha thing. That would make so much sense.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen Habesha people saying bye to each other?
Yeah, I said.
It never ends. And they're all backing out, like bowing to.
No.
When family comes over to visit, it's like, okay, the goodbye starts on the couch, and then it's like, oh my God, and then it's been an hour. Then they move over to where they're going to put their shoes on, and they're standing there for another hour.
At the door.
And then they're outside at the door. That's another hour. And then outside holding the car door open, and they're talking to each other. That's another hour. That's literally almost 4 hours of saying goodbye.
Yeah.
And then as they're driving off until they're off into the sunset, you're just. That's what it is. And so how could we not embody that, Mikias? How could we not? It's seeped in.
True. True.
Indeed. But yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate the podcast as well. It was nice hearing everyone's perspective. It helped me make sense of a lot of like background thoughts and experiences I had, and then hearing people's perspective on it. Of in some ways I relate, some ways I don't relate. It was interesting, and I definitely appreciate it.
Yeah, and I also wanted to say thanks because a platform like this like goes a long way to shifting the culture. So thank you guys for, you know, putting the groundwork for this kind of framework in place. So big thanks.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed part 3 of this episode titled Yewendoch Guday, Masculinity, Subjectivity, and Well-Being. Next week, we'll be talking about femininity, identity, and futurities from the perspective of Habesha women. See you then! The Kümneger Talks podcast has been brought to you by Selam Abebe, Mary Goitom, and Nassisse Solomon. Our theme music has been provided by the talented Lealem Abebe. Our sound design is the amazing Zeweldi, and all the artwork has been created by the lovely Dagmawit Worku.